this when it's on. Okay, good. Thank you, sir.
I would like to call the September 21st school board meeting back into session. The agenda that we're talking about is board procedures and policies. And I think Jane has done some work on this, and would you tell us what we've got here and why?
Well, good afternoon. We're going to start by talking about Neola. And with us today is Tom Young, and Tom is the Florida representative attorney for Neola. He's been a member of the Florida Bar from a long time.
50 years.
Is that what I should say? Yeah, 50 years.
50 years, yeah.
And Neola has a great product. At one time I thought we used Neola, but we did not. And I guess after some careful study, I found that we were doing some work with NEFECT, which nobody on this board, I think, really recognized. NEFECT is the Northeast Florida Education Consortium. It's primarily works with small districts, and it does some updates for us. And this is what they did. They, for a long time, worked with a law firm that helped them with their updates to policies, an attorney firm. And when this person retired, they took over his product and have worked with school board attorneys in making some of those available. We do not have a contract with them as such. We have been doing this on a piece-by-piece, policy-by-policy basis. And I think at the beginning of the year, Bridget was going to look into Neola, and Kathy had chatted with her about that, and then we never did anything. And I happened to be talking to Tom earlier this year at a FSBA meeting, and then went down to Port Charlotte area and actually sat and had dinner with the president of Neola, who is an attorney who is an attorney in Florida and Ohio, actually resides in Ohio. And so that's kind of how we started this conversation. So Tom said, well, I'll be glad to talk to you or to come to visit or make a presentation or whatever you need. But we wanted to look at this, so we got a contract together, which has been presented to us, and you've had that for your read ahead. It's important to note that Neola would be something that I think our attorney would like as well, because it will give us that extra set of eyes and ears to note all the changes that are coming down the pike now. And we know the Parent Bill of Rights itself has caused us to need to upgrade a lot of our policies. So this would be a wonderful way of doing things. I might add that a number of districts use Neola, and some of the things we'll be talking about afterwards today are what Neola categorizes as bylaws. We don't look at anything as bylaws, but bylaws are more those things that fall into the arena of procedures, and then the actual policies themselves. And of course, being able to have those policies up to date in a timely fashion has been something that's haunted us for years. So with that, I would just turn over the microphone. Is your red light on, Tom?
It's a green light.
It's a green light, yep. The green light for go, and let you introduce yourself and make some comments.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Gooden. Before I start, let me ask you, board members, how much time do you want me to take? I can do this in 5 minutes or an hour. It depends on what your agenda is and how much you want to hear from me. What's your, give me a sense of where you are on this.
I think if you can do it in 5 to 7 minutes, explain what your services are and what you do them, because I think some of us, because we weren't sure how policies were being written or where they were coming from. And and who you currently work for in the state.
Okay.
And
Well, to start with, I let the cat out of the bag.
could you pull the mic a little closer to you?
Sure. I've been practicing law in Florida for 50 years. All of that has involved public sector labor law. Much of it has involved school districts. I began working with Miami-Dade, it was then Dade County Public Schools, in 1971 as their director of legislative and employee relations. At that time, there was no collective bargaining law and there was no book of school laws. The statutes were spread around that applied to education, but there was no compendium. Now, I just received this. This is the current Florida School Laws 2021 edition. This is what has happened to school laws since 1971. And as you all know, the legislature has gone to meddling and is telling school districts how to educate children and telling them what their policies ought to be and passing laws which require school boards to change their policies to be in compliance with the law. You ask whom we serve currently. We are currently working with more than 30 Florida clients. I'll just quickly run through them. Jackson, Liberty, Franklin, Leon, Madison, Jefferson, Alachua, Pasco, Polk, Pinellas, Manatee, Brevard, Putnam, Indian River, Martin, DeSoto, Glades, Hardee, Hernando, Hendry, Highlands, Charlotte, Collier, Monroe, and Miami-Dade, and the Florida Virtual School, 2 charter schools in Tallahassee Community College. So we represent schools, districts like Franklin that has less than 1,000 students, 1 school, and Miami-Dade, which has 350,000. The school board policies are not that different depending on the size of the districts. The law applies to all of them, but each district needs and should have district-specific policies, and Neola is very cognizant of that fact. We have more than 500 policy templates on a board docs platform that we provide to the district client and ask them to compare those policies to your current policies. We will provide you a crosswalk so that you can compare by subject your policy and our templates and decide whether our policy or your template better suits your needs. When you finish this process, and we work through this process with the superintendents and staff, when we have a recommendation for a group of policies, we bring them to the school board in a workshop. The school board then gets involved, not before, because the law provides in the school board's duties and responsibilities, and I'm quoting, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the board shall adopt policies. The board, in my opinion, cannot adopt policies on its own. It must adopt policies that are recommended to them by the superintendent. Now, they can change what the superintendent recommends, but the superintendent brings the subject policy to the board. So what happens in these workshops is the superintendent and his staff, assisted by Neola, and I will be the lead representative for Neola with Sarasota, if you decide to work with us. We bring those policies to you in workshops, explain to you why the superintendent has made the recommendation for you on the individual policies. We discuss those policies. We do not vote. It's a workshop. I might add that in my life experience, I also had the good fortune of being a school board member. I was a school board member in Leon County from 1996 to 2000 and chair for the last 2 years in that position. So I have a good sense of what it is that school boards do. And by the way, we had some controversial issues back in those days, and I read the papers, and I understand that things haven't changed that much in recent years. You have my sympathy, my empathy, and my appreciation for what you do. I've sat in the seat. But we talk with you about what the superintendent's staff is recommending, and we reach a consensus without voting. We file those away and move to the next batch when they come. When we finish the workshops and make the revisions that are suggested by the board, we put them in final form. The board would then follow the APA in adopting them. We recommend, and every board that we work with has followed this recommendation, that at the time you adopt the policies, you have a motion that basically abolishes your current policies and replaces them with the new bucket of policies in their entirety. The policies are numbered by Neola. I've given a handout to you. This is some of our recent work, which you should recognize. I suspect the first one is a special update. We do updates as they are needed. Even if they are not needed at a time certain, we do 2 updates a year. That's part of the package that you contract for with us. And by the way, the first 3 updates for the first 1.5 years are at no additional fee other than the fee that you're paying for our services. This first one is a special update, and I know you're familiar with the parent-student rights and school safety. And then the next one, if you look at it, this is the policy update that just came out last week. The first line tells you what's 48 current policy templates need to be updated as a result of what the legislature did this past session in 20 and 21. 48 policies need revision to bring those policies into compliance with state law, the changes in the state law. There are also changes in the federal law. There are also changes in the Department of Education regulations and the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights, case law. All of those factors, all of those incidents involving change in education law are incorporated in our policy updates. We are the only company that does this service that warrants that our policies are in complete compliance with federal and state law and U.S. Department of Education and Florida Department of Education rules and regulations. The timeline for this process is totally dependent on you and your staff. We do not set a timeline. Miami-Dade did this process in 6 months. Some districts take more than 2 years. If they take more than a year, it's awkward because during that year when we have been working on policies, the law changes. And we have to go back and change some of the work that we've done during the process. So we encourage a commitment from the board and the superintendent to get this done as soon as they can. We recognize all of us who are in this business have been school administrators at one time or another, and we understand the school board and the administrators have more to do than deal with policy revision. We're cognizant of that fact, and that's why we say the timeline for this is yours, not ours. You decide how quickly you want to do this, and we will adjust our schedule to meet your needs. I'm not going to be the only one here. If there's a conflict with me, Amanda Clapp, the president of the company, who also spends much of her time in Florida at Sun City Center just up the road, the chief executive officer, Pat Corbett, spends much of his time in Collier County, and we have 3 other associates in Florida who, with the 6 of us, will be able to adjust our schedule to meet your needs. With that having been said, I'm often accused of being able to go on, and I can, but I won't. The chair suggested 5 to 7. I've already exceeded that. I will be happy to respond to any questions you might have or any comments.
Bridget.
Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, as Mrs. Goodwin mentioned, this is something we've looked at a couple times. Currently, and Mrs. Tompkins, I hate to put you on the spot, but from what I had gathered last time is our current, and it's not perfect, as has been noted, but the current provider, we pay something like $12.50 a month, or annually.
1,500.
3,000 annually, thank you, okay. So we pay 3,000 annually, and now, like I said, they send up the updates, and previously our general counsel would get those updates and then bring them to us. I don't know what the time was. When I was chair about 3 years ago, one of my focuses was redoing our entire policies to update them because there was internally seemed that there was not a good process. At one point it was headed under communications. And then, as Mrs. Tompkins will know, that when I became chair, when this was a priority, she had to actually run point on it. And then when we spent $55,000 with our current general counsel to update them all, and then to get up to speed for whatever had not been taken care of before I was chair, and therefore to continue that process. Now, it's to my understanding is that recently there's been some disconnect, but when we looked at this last time, there was a startup cost around $40-some thousand or $50,000. Now I think it was $43,700, and that was about a year and a half ago, 18 months ago. And so now, and I know that the offer is, I had it in front of me, $5,200 or so for an annual service. That includes the 3 updates. Is that correct?
It's 57,000.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Yes,
That extra
yes.
zero is very important. Thank you
Yes,
for that
yes.
correction.
And is that for 2 years or?
That's forever.
and then,
You can pay it over a 2-year period. Quarterly payments of about $7,000 a quarter to bring you to $57,275. That includes 3 regular updates at no additional charge.
Madam Chair, if I may, I would have finished my comments. So yeah, thank you for that clarification. And so in addition to that, so that includes those updates, but then, as you mentioned, you would come to a workshop, a member of your staff would come, and then there are billable hours that are associated with that as well. Is that correct, including travel?
No. There are no billable hours. With that price comes 80 hours of face-to-face time with staff. No matter how many of us are here, it counts as 1 hour. If 5 of us are here, it's still 1 hour.
Okay.
There are expenses for travel.
Okay.
And since I live in Port Charlotte, my expenses will be de minimis the times that I am here, but that also includes 150 hours of processing time, and the updates after the first 3, which are at no additional cost, are $2,275 per update, or $45.50 a year.
Okay. And I'm very familiar with many other counties that have used your service. I know that you have a good process. For me as a board member, I think it may be a little bit premature, because one of the other things that you mentioned, and historically kind of why I went through that part, is it appears, I'm sorry, it appears that we may need to ensure that the processes internally by way of staff are in place before that investment be done, because there has been some fragmentation in the past. And it's to your point of, it's incumbent upon staff how quickly we do some of these updates. It could be, in 1 year, or 6 months, or 2 months, or it could be 2 years. And so, and because we don't make those directional decisions by way of staff operations, and to be fair to our superintendent, I don't know that I knew this was the discussion, and I'm very appreciative of your time in coming here, but to me, I think there's some additional items that would need to be structurally placed, because where it was flawed before came to be, so there was not a good process internally, operationally.
Well,
my other question would be more for the board. Oh, no, one more was does this also include Novus? So board docs? Does that change anything? You said there's training for board docs, so that's just a whole library that we have access to?
Yes. And if I might, just very briefly on the process, we meet with the superintendent and his staff and discuss the process in detail, assist them in setting up a process that would allow for a coordinated effort so that all parties have a central point where everyone will know exactly where you are at a given point in time. So that process is something that we develop with the superintendent and his staff.
Okay. No, and again, like I said, I've heard very good things from other districts, and I don't know if St. John's used it, but if you're familiar or not. But my final question would be, because of the incurred costs, and this is not on you, this is more internally, and again, when I look at our legal fees and expenses, and because that was something that was housed and supported by our former attorney, that would be my question as to why would that service be needed on such a robust level when it was managed previously by our general counsel. So I don't know if that's a question for the chair, our vice chair, or our general counsel.
I think our attorney wants to weigh in on that. Microphone.
Thank you, Member Ziegler. I appreciate the question. I think I can shed some light on that. So when we at Shoemaker became counsel for the board back in February, part of my charge was to undergo a process of finding out where we had issues. And I went through a process of looking at, among other things, our policies and procedures. And I quickly determined that we had a significant issue related to our policies and procedures, both in terms of the manner in which they were updated. As you said, we have an issue internally in terms of our process, but also a significant backlog in terms of properly updating our policies, because as the speaker identified correctly, there are regular changes in state law, there are regular changes in federal law. He talked about one very significant state law that required the change in literally dozens of policies. So we had a situation, and I think the board had a very good understanding of that at the time we were brought on, that this was a billion-dollar public entity that really had operated with one general counsel for about 25 years, and there was, no fault to him, he's a terrific counsel and did a terrific job, but we grew significantly into this billion-dollar public entity, and he simply wasn't able to keep up with some of the changes that were required over time. So I spoke to folks here at the district about the issue. I certainly recommend that we utilize someone like Neola. Neola, in my experience in interfacing with other district council, is sort of the gold standard in terms of being able to undergo a project like this and to provide regular ongoing information and updates for policies. So I think this is something that is needed, but it's also true that we need to make sure our internal policies are corrected such that we don't have, again, a problem on an ongoing basis.
And just to follow up, Madam Chair, is to the general counsel would be, is our current vendor, and when they send that update, is that not something we could send to your firm to provide those updates? I'm trying to do a cost-benefit analysis, if you will.
I'm sorry, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah. Perhaps Brennan can answer, or Dr. Assman. We can't we don't have a contract with anyone right now. And the one who is doing it says we're too big for them.
Well, the association itself, being in the association, I know they represent.
Is your mic on?
Yes, smaller districts, but they still will help you with writing policy. You just have to, pay for that. I know, I believe, I'd have to double check, but I believe in St. John's we did use NEFAC, and I know we were with them quite a bit. And the policy changes and so forth would come to our attorney, and then our attorney would help us create the new policy, and then we'd present it to the board and have that approved at that point. That's just that's been my experience.
Karen?
Thank you. Did you say, Dr. Esplin, NEFAC? Is that the company you referenced? May I ask the speaker, what is the roughly a district of our size, what is the amount of time that our current employees would have to invest in this? When you say you work with our staff, what would be their amount of time for our district our size on average?
It depends completely on how you structure the input process. If you spread it out, one of the best ways to describe this is the old analogy of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Can you give me a range?
No.
Okay.
I can say that if the workload is spread among, the more staff among which the workload is spread, the less time individual staff will be involved in working on it.
Thank you. I take issue with this. The excitement of this morning for me is the work that I want to prioritize. I couldn't have been more excited that we spent this amount of time on academic achievement and look forward to it being a priority. I know as an executive director, we spent an inordinate amount of time on writing policy, and I don't want to see another distraction. I realize that policy is non-negotiable and it has to be updated. That's a given. But I very much caution us with another distraction for staff or more work for staff. If indeed we were going to look at something like this, I would look at staff in addition to what we currently house to handle it, because we are not a strong A any longer, and we need to have a priority and we need to focus as we did this morning. And I would also be very interested in that, in all due respect of the speaker and Miami-Dade, I'm interested in what number one in the state for quite a while, how they do it, who they do it with, and it just so happens we have that individual with firsthand experience and knowledge. I would want to research their process and how it's done, but most importantly, I want to overemphasize that we've made more headway than I've seen in a long time academically with the right leadership, the right structures and networks, and to put anything on our staff that isn't academic, I consider a grave error in student performance.
My question would be, I think the staff that we're looking at would be our assistant. We're not asking our principals or executive directors to be, because what we're going to be doing is taking our policies and changing it from our format to their format. I don't know if any of you looked at the other district's policies. You know, I asked last week the last two workshops for you to look at other districts' policies to see how they were laid out. And, you know, I saw a few that stood out, and it turned out I didn't really realize that Manatee was Neola, but I look at the bottom of it and I see it was. And then there was, you know, we worked on, and that's something we could do is, you know, if Kathy can't do it all, you know, we could have a board member on each chapter working with her. But basically what they're going to do is take the policy we have and renumber it.
No, not necessarily.
That's not what he said.
No. What we recommend is that your staff, by subject area, review your current policy and compare it to our template and decide whether or not our template or your current policy best suits your needs. And if it is your policy, then we would in fact move it over, change the format, change the numbering. But our experience has been that it is more expeditious, simpler to take Neola's templates and modify them to bring them into a district-specific mode and then bring those together, because the numbering system and the updates, for example, the updates are based upon changing the template, putting the new language in the template that would bring it into compliance with federal or state law changes. If what you do is in whole cloth move your current policies into our numbering system on the same subject, then it would be very difficult for you to find where in your policy the language which needs to be changed would fit.
You know, I know I would be willing to work with her like we did when we worked with Art. But Tom, you're next. I'm not quite sure of the pricing. If you could explain that again.
The total price is $57,275.
But that's a 2-year contract.
It is not really a 2-year contract. That's the total cost of the service. We break it down for you. Most districts are not enthusiastic about paying a lump sum. You can do that.
Right. Well, we have an issue, I think, with a contract over 50,000.
So what we've proposed to you is quarterly payments of a little bit over $7,000 for 2 years, at the end of which the service would have been paid for in its entirety, and you would then owe each year $2,275 per update for as long as you want them. You can discontinue the contract at any time. If you're dissatisfied with the product or the service, you can stop it. There's no cancellation fee, but the initial cost is $57,275, which we have been willing to spread over 2 years.
And those updates, do they include the legislative ones, or?
Yes, oh yes. They include any changes that are required in your policy, whether they emanate from legislative changes, federal law changes, US DOE changes, Office of Civil Rights changes, case law changes, whatever it is that requires a change in your policy, we incorporate in those updates.
And that would be how much per year to do that?
$4,550 a year, that's for $2,275 per update. And that would also include any special updates that are required as a result of some time-specific date of effective date.
Okay, like if there was a special session?
Yes.
Tom?
So my first question is, and bear with me, I'll be quick. I keep hearing that we're referring somehow that we have an issue internally that has stopped or caused this problem to occur. What is that? Who would I ask that?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, Tom. I think, you know, when Art Hardy was here, kind of emulated what I was used to seeing at St. John's. And I think because we're the same size, and I know we're growing quickly, but our attorney there, Frank Upchurch, I'm sure you know Tom. Frank Upchurch was kind of like Art Hardy, and I think we paid $150,000 a year, and he just helped us with everything. That was just how it worked. And he took care of all the policies and so on and so forth. And I think when Art left, and now we have Shoemaker, which has an exorbitant number of resources, which is a really great thing. I think part of what we may have lost was the education piece as far as what we do and everything else. I know when I was working with Patrick, everything that I needed him to do or that you asked him to do as far as create policy, he did a really great job as far as getting in there and creating that. But at the same time, one thing I know he was working on was understanding Florida school law and understanding that book, that Florida school law book, which very diligently working on that, you know, did a great job. But not having the experience, the 30 years of experience that Art had or that Frank Upchurch had. And I think right now we are in that process. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan. We're in that process of having your firm help us with everything, but also kind of understand Florida law and using some of the resources that you have to help understand that. And that has kind of slowed us down a little bit too, I think.
So we have hired an individual who represents Charlotte County who has 30 years of experience and would be an equivalent to the type of lawyer you just described. our problem is a little bit deeper than that, and that is the manner in which, as Member Ziegler described, the manner in which we are now correcting policies is a bit of an ad hoc policy. So the legislature passes the piece of legislation that affects 40 of our policies. We don't have a mechanism now to go and fix those 40 policies. Over time, not every policy was corrected. If you look at the history on the policies, again, you look at every policy, it shows when it was enacted and when it was last amended. There simply was a drag on the amendment of policies over time, and cumulatively, we have a problem. So the beauty of something like Neola is that they have a template. Once you go through this process, your policies are all up to date with state, federal law, and then they have an update, and that update is comprehensive and addresses every issue. The simple fact is now, if you look at our policies and procedures, we have issues, and all you have to do is look at the last meeting when we discussed the fact, for example, that our comment card didn't actually match our policies and procedures. So, there are a lot of those types of things.
If I might, just to Mr. DeLeo, I believe you're referring to Mr. McKinley, Mike McKinley.
Yes, sir.
I've worked with Mike McKinley for almost 20 years, and off and on. And Mr. McKinley is very familiar with our product. And if you need any further information about our product, Mr. McKinley would be an excellent source.
If I may, so I understand the issue internally. So on I guess the policies would have been updated from the last legislative session. Is that correct? Theoretically, that's what should have happened, and I know that I asked Patrick a few times, what does this mean to us? And he had to go do a deeper dive. So what we're saying is that, and I'll have a question for Dan DeLeo in a second, is that since the legislative session, we have not done any updating of those policies. Is that correct?
So, so yesterday, it was probably 50 policies that came to me at one time that need to be updated. And I think that's beyond what the legislative session was, because I think it's back to what Dan was saying, was that it has accumulated over time for years. And now we have a stack of policies that need to be worked on and fixed. And yes, back to what Karen was saying, when I look at those 50, I'm thinking, how are we gonna do this? But we can figure this out, but it needs to be fixed. And so if we go, one question that I have for Tom Young is, if we go with Neola, it sounds like the first thing we would need to do is bite the bullet and fix every policy first and get all of them on the right template, so that then it runs smoothly from there on out. Because right now it's so messed up that we're just kind of hodgepodge fixing things and putting Band-Aids on things. Now, I think that needs to happen. It's now, how could we do that so it doesn't affect us as much instructionally, and how are we going to make that happen so that we get it right and we have the right template? So that's, I think, where we're at.
May I respond, Madam Chair?
You're not yet. You're 2 down the line. Okay, Tom, are you finished?
No, I have more, but I'll re-end.
No.
Okay, Jane is next. You can key back in.
Well, what I wanted to do was just explain a couple of things. One is that this price was based on our number of students, our net number of students that we have in the school district, and that's how Neola arrives at a price. But basically, we have no choice to fix this. I mean, we can quibble around about this all we want to, and some people that like me and don't like me may think, oh, well, it's another thing that Jane wants to do. This is something that we got to do. I talked to Sonia in in ESE and know the hurdles that she has right now. And once we do this, and Neola comes in, we have the 80 hours, we have these people helping us, it's a matter of taking a template that is up to date, looking at our policy side by side and saying, okay, this has got to be, let's fix it, or let me agree to fixing it with this template. I mean, that's pretty much what we're looking at. It's not like, it's like a law firm having boilerplate, which is always really good, right, Dan? When I do a will or a trust, okay? Same difference, but Neola researches. These folks are attorneys. They know what's going on in the industry. They do manage this, and they know how to help us alleviate it being a problem. And then once we take the big breath and we've got it done, then we're good to go from that point on. So I will reiterate the fact that we don't really have any choice on this, because otherwise we're not working within the law. And then we get ourselves into trouble. And I think this takes the per hour cost that we're paying in our attorney fees away, which I think is another good side of it, with people who are professionally and do professionally know. Now, this resides on board docs, and not to confuse everything, but we don't use board docs for our board agenda. We use Novus, and we've talked about going back to board docs. Don't know where that is. But right now, the bylaws, which are what we call procedures, and the policies reside in board docs, and there's no problem of interfacing that with our current system. I didn't want that to be confused
correct.
and to be incorrect, so I just wanted to straighten that issue out. But I think I support this, and I think we need to do it.
Karen?
Thank you. I didn't mention anything personal because it isn't, and I wholeheartedly reinforce and confirm we have to have up-to-date policies relative to the legislature. My main concern, and it isn't going away, I was part of the last updates and the amount of time that it took staff. And yes, Madam Chair, you say that the board can do it. It requires input from departments relative to what those policies are steering towards, indicate. As this gentleman speaker is shaking his head, yes. I only have one non-negotiable for me as an individual board member prioritizing achievement, that if we're going forward with this, that it isn't our staff that steers away from instruction and learning, that we have our arms wrapped around, and that the superintendent have the opportunity to contract or such with an individual that has access to departments to appropriately update policy. Of course, it isn't personal. It's very much instructional.
Bridget?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to just go back to Mr. Edwards' question, because I think it's an important one, because we don't want to do the same thing over and over again and have the same result. So I think what happened is there is a disconnect whatever avenue we go. We need to have the connectivity of who's going to own it, because it comes in, and then we'll have whoever the legal oversight professional that's going to help us. But what happens is one time was housed under comms, then it was moved to, then we moved it to board to ourselves, because we were in the exact same position we're in right now, and that's why we did an overhaul, which I'm sure staff back there can attest to. They all took part in it, and we invested $55,000 to do all of that, get us back up to date. And then, what is that one firm called? The one that we have right now? NEFAC. They continue to send us updates. There's a disconnect of when we get that, who owns it? Like, is there an overview? No, I know it's not on you, and I don't know if Kathy can talk through this. I don't know if it still is under comms or what have you. And then whoever our legal specialist is at this point needs to then evaluate it as it goes to be in compliance in comparison to what we have in place. That's the internal process that is not yet in place. We owned it as a board at that point, just because I don't want to be out of compliance. I mean, that's a big deal. So we got there. The process of taking, and I don't know if it was over a changeover with the superintendent or what have you, because it does require some staff to take it in, own it, and then transfer it over to the attorney or what have you. So that's where that broken piece is that would need to be addressed.
Mr. Edwards?
Thank you for that clarification. So the 50 policies that arrived on your desk for update, did they come from you, Dan? They came from through our office. Okay, and is that 50 part of the service that we're already subscribed to?
I think so. I'm not sure. I got them yesterday afternoon. I haven't looked at them yet, but I think they are, yes.
Okay, so the fact that our policies have not been updated for what sounds like a substantial period of time, what's our vulnerability with that? I'm asking Dan because he would be the...
We're very conscious of the issue. When we found out about the issue, we raised the issue. But to address your question directly, we're constantly advising the cabinet administrators, the superintendent, with respect to issues of gaps in any policy.
Got it.
We're on that.
Okay, so here's where my concerns are. And if you, I did do my homework and I read a lot of those policies from other counties, which, by the way, Mrs. Rose or Ms. Rose had the luxury of being part of the school district. So when she landed as a school board member, she didn't have a learning curve or have to go through an orientation that I never got. So the fact that I'm asking all of these questions is reflective of our policies are out of date. Because one of the things I did read was an orientation from another county of what happens for a new school board member, and that would have been incredibly beneficial for me. So I am asking this question and pointing that out as an example because the reality is I have 2 retiring school board members, another school board member that is up for reelection, and I need to know that this piece of the policy is in place, that it will be working, and that we are in compliance. So having said all of that, I want to find the best possible, most cost-effective solution to do that. Otherwise, I'd be derelict in my fiduciary responsibilities. So that's why I'm asking all of these questions. So because I also agree with Ms. Rose that we're on the brink of doing some quality work here, and I don't want to have that be a distraction, but is there a timing strategically that we would add this update to our to-do list so that the strategic plan is up and off the ground and that we know that this is being addressed as quickly as possible? And the gentleman that they hired at Schumacher, who I interviewed as one of your competitors, I really liked him. He was just too small. So it seems that we're moving in the right direction to address so many of these question marks, but I want to solve the problem in the most cost-effective, timely manner. So having said that, I personally feel like I need to spend a little bit more time offline doing some more due diligence here so that I feel more informed to make say how I would vote or
What I would like to do on this is ask Dr. Asplund to look into it further and come back with a recommendation. We also have a policy we are looking to change, and we're running out of time to even look at that. I think we spent all of our time looking at the contract right now, and we need to have Dr. Aspen make a determination on where he wants to go with this and bring a recommendation back to the board.
May I?
Karen?
I would like to give the superintendent leeway when he brings back his recommendation to include the impact on instruction and perhaps personnel.
You can talk to him and ask him to do whatever he wants. I'd like to work on our agenda, which is a policy that we are looking at changing right now.
Right, and I also would like to add that relative to Mr. Edwards, and I agree with everything that he said, that the strategic plan isn't something that gets off the ground. The strategic plan is something that's ongoing every day, and the work every day is equivalent to the work of getting it off the ground. It doesn't start and end. So I just will continue, regardless, to overemphasize the instructional focus. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. If, we will be, looking at this further, and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, board members, and good luck. Thank you. Again, I appreciate what you do.
As you all know, our board meetings have been getting a little out of hand, and some of that has to do with the public participation. Jane looked at a couple of policies it was Broward and Duval, and she kind of brought them together. I had one that for Manatee County that I brought last time. I don't know if any of you brought it with you this time. If you need it, if you need the one for Manatee County, I've got an extra copy. Do you have a copy of it, Brennan?
I don't.
It starts on the second page. The first page is what they say at the beginning of a meeting. We've got two policies in front of us. Some of the things are the same, some of them are different. I think one big difference is the time frame, and then some of the other language. And even the one for Manatee, there's some changes that I would make too. The one thing right now, we have each speaker is allowed 3 minutes. We have an hour's up to 3 minutes. And I think what both of these have done, which I think we need to do, is break the differences between those that are talking to a specific, it says proposition here, we could call it agenda item, that you would have that at the beginning of the meeting before you vote, and then there would be general public comment after the board is finished. In fact, I thought we were going to start doing that, but I don't see that on the agenda unless it got changed after mine was printed. Does anybody have any comments? Jane.
Thank you. I was going to say that this particular set of documents that Shirley hashed out is really bylaws, what Manatee County considers bylaws, meaning this is not the actual procedure of it, this is the way the board operates, and the operating/procedures are what Neola calls bylaws, and this would be this number 0169.1, that would be in the bylaws section.
Oh.
And I was just going to say that I worked, those are just some particulars, but I worked with Mike McKinley on a policy that would go into effect, that would change the particulars of the hearing of citizens to a maximum of 1 hour, agenda items only at the beginning of the meeting, and then have everyone else who wish to speak at the end of the meeting, off TV, 1 minute each. This is what a number of boards have done. Everybody is looking at their hearing of citizens because of the acrimony that we've had at the board meetings, and trying to get, some guardrails on this whole thing. So I think all of these things are good. I think that what the chairman does, Shirley, that you presented, I think this is all good.
I'm sorry. Were you saying, I was like, we've got different language here, so you're looking at the language on the Manatee one? I think there's some language on the other one that I'd like to add.
This is what they say before they speak.
Right.
And then this is in the bylaws section, in other words, the procedure section, which you've been talking about, are changing our procedures. This is what they formally call bylaws, which are procedures under the Neola plan, the 0169.1.
Yeah, they call it a bylaw rather than a
They
policy.
call it a bylaw, and then the policy itself would be reflected in section 2.22.
Karen?
Could, please, clarification, because I perceive that I'm not quite certain on what it is you're proposing. There's this document that says public participation that you just handed out. There's the one that says board meetings that's got some red crossed out in it, and then there's the one that's all in red. Can I get clarification on
What the clarification is I asked board members to look at other counties to see how they did theirs, so that we could look at what other people do, so that the board members would come forward and say, I like this, I like that. I'm not coming to you with a policy or a recommendation that this is what you have to do before we write it up. I want feedback from you all on what it is you want. Do you like the way where they, that they came up with that says, well, we're gonna limit the speakers if there's 10 to 3 minutes, so that they get it within an hour, although I'm not quite sure how that all works, because if you have 10 at 2 minutes, and that's 20 minutes, but, I just I want your feedback on how you want it laid out. How do you want to see public comment?
Do you want it now?
You've got the floor.
I think that we have some extraordinary challenges, and we've landed in a place where I feel like we are smoothing out, and our focus is on instruction. I think changing public comment at this time has very negative optics, and I'm not opposed to sometime in the future, over the summer, to look at updating our policies and best practices. To do it in the heat of this moment, I think is very much an error, and sends a message that I'm not saying that is trying to be sent, but it's being sent. I don't think this is a time in the heat of any moment that you cut off or change public comment.
Thank you. Bridget?
Thank you. I know, and I did look at other policies. I've looked at them previous to, again, like I said, we've talked about this pre-COVID. I also would agree with Mrs. Rose's statements that I am at a time where I really do want us, I recognize everyone's goal is to make these meetings run smoothly and to run the business of the board, which is our obligation as well. However, I think that the perception will only exacerbate the unrest in a way. I don't know if I the right word to use. So I am not in support of capping it right now. I think that something we want to discuss in a calm time, so it looks like it's focused on that and not a response to criticisms or a robust amount of public feedback. I would support that at a later time. I will say that historically, and when we've had this conversation, Mrs. Goodwin knows this, that I have always supported the idea or a policy for public comment that would include the first public comment for board item agendas for action items, so that I think that's efficient, makes sense for our staff, it makes sense for anyone who wants to come to speak on an item that's going to take action on that day. And that's one of the main points of public comment. But I also believe that having a general open public comment, and at this time would say we need to leave it open, because I believe that will calm waters, not kind of have a reverse effect. And then at a future date, we could reevaluate whether we want to do any kind of time limit. I generally don't love that idea, but for me right now, that would be the only change that I say as far as as far as placement, that would be it. And in this one example, there is it answered one of my questions when it said a member of the public may speak on one or more specific propositions or agenda items. Because I had asked, does that mean somebody can speak on each agenda item or not? And the way they have this language in there, I think includes all of it. So they're one time to speak for 3 minutes. They can speak on 3, 5, or 1, and that addressed one of my questions. So I would pull that language in.
The other thing is, and I'm not quite sure how Manatee does it, but Manatee allows people to, as soon as the agenda is published, to sign up online to speak. I don't know how well that goes, how often it's used, but that's something we could have Kathy call over there and find out how it works, if anyone uses it. If it would help or hurt, I'm not sure. You know, if we'd have people signed up that then don't show up, is that going to cause a problem? But I'm hearing Bridget saying that she understands to separate, to have, yes, these are the people that are going to talk on the agenda items, because we have staff sitting here, like what we did last time. Staff had to sit here, and then the executive from PGT probably went home to eat dinner. I mean, because it just ran so late, and staff had to sit here it's so late. I mean, so I hear Bridget talking that way. I hear me talking that way. Is there anyone else who agrees on splitting those two out? And Tom, you're up.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. What I want to alleviate is a perception, so you don't have to wonder what I'm doing. I'm going to tell you. So I will be as transparent as I possibly can. These last heated times that you refer to, I view as public comments in two fashions. One is a political rally where people come in one after the other after the other. I liken that to the Moms for Liberty, which was started as a political activist, seemingly, and now it's talking points across the country to school board members. And that's what I'm looking to alleviate. The 3 minutes still intact at the beginning are for public comments that relate to our strategic plan, to the concern that Mrs. Rose has about legitimate instructional or situations. And I've seen it happen in our boardroom. In the midst of all of that, I've seen Dr. Asplund say, Mr. Renoff, can you run after that person and meet with them in the hallway? So those 3 to 2 minutes still address what I think are ultra important public comments, but that when we get a political rally, which is 20, 40, 60, 75 people coming in to tell us the same thing over and over again, particularly I'll use the example of CRT that we don't even teach, that's what I'd like to minimize. I'd like to say that the political rallies belong out there, not in the boardroom where we're trying to address our families and their concerns and their interests and the instructional piece of the board work. So I like the format of how we have it broken down or how it was presented. And by the way, I attended a webinar where I heard this policy, and I believe it's what Lee County does, and I thought, well, that really addresses what my concerns are, and it divides it by time, and it addresses that political rally piece. So I'd be happy to further discuss that and send the right message, not a perception, the right message to the community that if you're coming to the boardroom to have a political rally, it doesn't belong here. It belongs out in political land.
There is that freedom of speech issue, and perhaps Dan can speak to this. I understand that speech is usually limited when the courts look at it. They're looking at time, place, and manner when somebody talks about whether or not they get to speak. I mean, it's not an open forum necessarily. But on the one hand, if they're talking about and groups can pull together. I mean, we know we might have Planned Parenthood in one day, and are we not going to let them speak because they're a group? So on the one hand, we have to allow them to have their time, but we have to do the work of the board. The business comes first. So I'm hearing you're saying yes to splitting it and putting general comment at the end, but then we get down to, do we limit that general comment? Do they get the full 3 minutes? Mm-mm. Or do we limit it by the number of people? Do we limit it by time? Dan?
So the Florida statute that's operative here is 286.0114. It's entitled Public Meetings, Reasonable Opportunity to be Heard. And the notion here is that there is a First Amendment right for individuals to address elected officials, but the focus is on people having a reasonable opportunity to be heard on a proposition that is before a board or a commission, in this case, the school board. So the policy idea that was floated is certainly consistent with Florida law. It's consistent with the First Amendment. There are always ways to deal with disruption of different varieties. And this policy that's been floated here has some mechanisms in it for doing that, but there are many more. And this is an issue that I can tell you right now, many school board council are wrestling with.
I'll get some more input because we're running a little late on time, and I will work with Kathy and take the information I'm hearing from you today and put a proposal out there, send it to you before the next workshop, that you can get your comments, get them back to Kathy, and maybe with all of those, we can have something that we might be voting on. The next one on the,
Madam Chair,
Karen,
may I?
yes, I just called you.
Okay, thank you. There's a piece for me over the years that's been significant that we've all seen in action and has been referenced. And when you talk about splitting the time in it being the 3-minute folks, speakers, being relative to the agenda, time and time again for years, decades, we have parents come forward and with a lot of exceptional student education, special needs, families that haven't been able to navigate their way through. But in those situations, it's been referenced that Madam Chair, you or Dr. Asplin get them immediate attention. So are we saying that those folks that are not immediately aligned to an agenda item have to wait till the end of the meeting when perhaps staff is released and get 1 minute?
Well, no one has said 1 minute yet, but I think we can all kind of agree, but that's not the best way for a parent to have their needs met. The parent should, which is what we say, should go to the school or should send an email or make a call to the superintendent's office on that very unusual time. If a parent does come, they meet here, but I don't want parents to think that if they have a problem with their school, what they need to do is come to the school board to get it resolved, because I don't want them to follow into that, because if a parent has a problem with their teacher, with their school, or with anything else, they should take it up with their school, and if they can't get that resolved, they can call the superintendent's office or the school board office, and they will refer that parent to where it needs to go. But if the last thing is that they show up at a school board meeting and tell their story, we try to provide. But if it's not an agenda item, comments, it goes towards the end. But again, hopefully, we will get to those comments in a rather quick fashion, because the work of the board doesn't take that much time. The work of the board, we can probably be done in 15 minutes. Jane.
Well, I just wanted to say this bylaw that I proposed and read came from Lee County, one of the most divisive counties in the state, I might add. I've never seen such a political quagmire as we have in Lee County, and some issues with their board. But it's 1 hour for initial comment at the beginning of the meeting. I don't care how it's broken up. I thought that it should be done by numbers of minutes relative to size of the people that would require speaking. But 1 hour before, and then we have the business of the board, and then after the board is met, then we have the hearing generally of other citizens. And hopefully we get to that much more quickly, but we will have already done the business of the meeting. And these people that have been coming, largely, there are other solutions. As Shirley said, there are other solutions to their problems. I had an email from someone who wanted to know, why the air conditioner wasn't on in Building 2 at Venice High School. Well, I have no idea about that. That certainly isn't, and I mean, by the time I got the message, I called Venice High School, it was fixed. But the point is, that shouldn't have come to me anyway. And a parent shouldn't come to the school board and make names and talk about specific students or situations. That should be private. That should go to the superintendent, to HR, to the school principal, but it should not come to the school board meeting. So those kinds of things shouldn't be coming. I had somebody yesterday that could not navigate the web, our website. So some of those things we've got to through some good customer service. We got to fix that. I think we really need a customer service desk that's not just generally for this parent empowerment person that we're hiring. I don't know what that person's going to do, but I think we need a way to have people reach out to the school district and get things answered, Craig, that might be asking. We've done that a few times. I know you're busy, but I just think that this is the first step at getting some control over this, and we really need to do the business of the board, and we need to make sure that we're not political theater. That's all.
Bridget.
Thank you. I want to address a couple things. So, Mrs. Rose, I'm glad you brought up, I have two questions. So I do like the breakout of it, but I would believe, in my opinion, any of these are only worthwhile if they're followed. And the lack of consistency of our policies or procedures, even as to what someone says is allowable and not, is not being executed, and we should all be able to agree on that. It is not being executed consistently across the board. So we could spend 45 more minutes on a discussion about a policy that will be adopted, and if it's not executed with fidelity, is exactly how it's stated, it's a moot point. So in my opinion, and I believe in order to move past this, that there needs to be an element of understanding to not add to the escalation, to not escalate the scenario, but because we should be trying to listen and de-escalate. And so that overall is one of my biggest frustrations when I watch up here, whether I agree with someone or not, whether it's a criticism of me or not, I sit there and I listen because that is my job as a public official. But I also recognize we need to do the business of the board, and I want to be sensitive to everyone else. And I think there's a level of decorum it makes it far more theatrical and toxic when there is combative nature happening back and forth with amped up people. So, and I'm not here to tell you or any member of the public that they don't have a right to be upset or not. And what concerns me about what Mr. Edwards had said is, I mean, Mrs. Brown, I wrote it down and you said it almost exactly, like what are you perceiving as being political? I mean, if it's so, I think that is a very dangerous bar, and I go back to the lack of consistency and how things are executed. We have to have a balance. People can speak about what they want as long as they're not imposing threats, as long as they're not impeding on someone else's right to petition their government or creating a threatening environment here. And we have our obligation to not elevate a threatening circumstance. So, and again, I believe we have to be held to a higher standard, especially when we're in here. So with that said, I say if we move towards the element of a separation between policy and general open, my only actual reservation of that is I don't want to, I foresee that someone will come up, and it's intimidating to come speak out here. I mean, people get very nervous. Take the time to come and speak on an agenda item, and someone stops them and says, no, that's not an agenda item. But in their mind, it actually has an implication to whatever is on there. I think that's my only concern based on what I've seen here previously, and that there needs to be extreme grace provided. And until I think we illustrate that we can do that the way it's being done right now with public comment, that would be my only reservation about separating it, because again, we will find ourselves no better off if we're interrupting people or putting them down or telling them that this doesn't warrant their time in this section. So that part needs to be addressed.
I hear you. Brennan?
Yeah, just to put in my 2 cents if I can, just past experience as far as splitting it up. I know that's what I was used to seeing. It was really to get the work of the board over with, and for those items that are being voted upon, and to keep those everything, so it's not all mixed up all over and you're trying to pull different comments out of different people depending on what you're trying to vote on. It's really focused in one area, and then have everyone else at the end. I think that's good. I think also some parents who do bring issues, sometimes I think they're not really even sure what to do, and I agree, maybe we need to have a better communication help desk or some other way that everybody knows how they can be helped, because we could do it quicker. We can get to it faster. Even before board meetings happen, we could fix different items. But if there are people who want to come and talk about that, they can. I would just say that it would be good to have it at the end. I've seen it that way, done that way, and it seemed to flow pretty well.
Thank you. Tom?
And just to add clarity to a couple of things that were mentioned, I honestly don't know that the beginning piece of it has to be 100% related to the agenda if it's a smaller group of people. Because when it's a smaller group of people and you give them 3 minutes and they talk about whatever it is that they would like to talk about, and often that's when we've found people who have come in with legitimate concerns that we identified and jumped on. And I think the other piece of this is that I'm not ever, even from a political standpoint, which I think it's easy to discern, we've all seen it, when Dr. Asplund says, follow them out to the hallway, that's the difference between, he doesn't say that to the other 99 people that are saying the same thing over and over again, that are agitated and amped up. And I'm not even asking to take away their voice. I'm saying do it at the end of the meeting and give them the 1 minute, and then they can all walk up and yell and carry on, and hopefully not do that, but still give them their right to talk to their elected official and to speak otherwise. So I think it's just a way of organizing those groups in such a way that we can hear legitimate and we give everyone their right to speak at the end.
I think we all agree that we want to have, bring civility to our meetings. I think we're all that. So I've heard what you've said, and I think what we will now is I will revisit these rules, and in the spirit of putting the business of the public schools first. We know everyone has the right to speak, but they don't have the right to sabotage the public's right to, to an orderly meeting. So we'll work on that, try to manage that, to give people their chance to speak. But I think we all need to work at, the things we say and do, even not at the board table, but even out in the public, so that we don't add to the tenor that's out there. And I will do what I can. Please, if you have comments that you would like to make about either these proposals or another proposal, that you've got something you say, well, I like this language, get it to Kathy, and I will sit with Kathy next week and bring something forward that I'll have her send to you. And also on the cards, I'd like to add on the cards that the board members will not engage in conversations, and that this isn't the place, and we might even put that in the public speaking, that this isn't the place to try to solve a problem with your child. If you've got a problem with the school, maybe even tell them how to handle that, perhaps, just even put that in there, but that we will take care of that. So if there's anything that you would like to see, because I know we got the 3-minute with a bell. We don't talk about the green light and the yellow light even. We might want to put something like that on the card. But I have to update the law that it's on there too. Bridget, did you have something else to say on this?
Yeah, no, well, as far as the card goes, well, as far as, you mentioned the parent, I think that's a communication as a macro level of understanding, trying to work at the school level for parents to find the best way to navigate it. But in the event someone feels that they can't, they come here, right? But I don't know how we're not doing anything of that up here. If someone comes to speak, they come to speak. And the other thing, to Mr. Edwards' point, in the event there's a smaller group and we have this process and that's the agenda printed, the chair can always make a motion to amend, to amend the agenda's order. And we can just address it that way. The other final thing was, I just wanted to add, and I don't know if there's a legal component to this, but I know that the last meeting, there was some confusion. Well, it seemed like certain things were made on the fly. And I don't know if we have a lot of speakers tonight or not. I don't. But there was something said about if you didn't fill out the card completely, that you weren't able to speak. There was an order aspect. So I wanted to clarify, one, I think we need to keep the order of people coming in. I don't know, however we used to do it. When I was chair, there was numbered. And I also, I understand we want to put their name and et cetera. I have hesitations when I've heard when someone comes up, please state your first and last name, like very loudly, because I don't want to intimidate members of the public I think like there's an element it's a bit off. Finally, what is our timeline on these changes? And then I'm assuming this would have to be advertised. We have 28 days, et cetera. So, Madam Chair, can you give us an update on timeline on kind of where you see this going?
Yeah, if we were going to be making a change to the policy, we would have to discuss it at a workshop first, and then I would imagine, I don't know if we still need to have an agenda and then wait to another meeting, or if we could have the agenda after we've discussed it. Now, we've got everybody's input, and you will have time to input on the proposal that we put out there, that we can put it out there and put it on the next board to advertise the policy too. I would like to be able to do that at our next meeting if possible. And then it wouldn't be effective until we voted on it, I think 28 days later. Now we have a fun thing to do. Dr. Brennan, legislation. Dr. Asplin. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. I included the priority issues from last year in your packet. It was number 6, I believe, in your packet. Those are the items that we had last year as far as our Sarasota platform. When I looked at those, I thought that the first 3 bullets were ones that we would continue to keep on there. The 5th bullet we would continue. 6th and 7th bullets, yes. So the 2 that I would say take off of these would be the 4th bullet down and the last bullet. But I wanted to have some discussion about that. The other that we probably should add would be one thing that has come up with the Parents' Bill of Rights is what happens when the parents don't agree. And we're having a hard time, right, Dan? We're having a hard time with that, trying to figure out which parent do you go with on that. And so we're trying to figure that piece out. I don't know if it needs to be on here or if we can get some clarity in a different way, but that would be helpful. Also, as you know, it looks like the FSA test will not be given after this year. So we do have the FSA test this year at the end of the year, but then after that we do not have the FSA test, and there'll be a new way, which will be progress monitoring, probably 3 times a year is my guess. But I know that I'm sure there's going to be committees and much discussion as far as what that should look like and how does that relate to school grades and how does that relate to teacher evaluations, and there's a lot of things there. And I thought that we should definitely want to be a part of that. And I'm sure they're going to build committees, but I'm not sure if that should be on the legislative platform, that we want to be, as school districts, be involved in that process or not, because I'm assuming they're going to have us be involved in that anyway. But is that a legislative item? I'm not sure.
Well,
So
I
throw
think
that
it
out there as
should
well.
be a legislative item that they should either work with school boards and districts and district superintendents
Okay.
when they're changing that,
All right.
so that they know that we need to be on. And
Okay. And I'm hearing, and again, I don't know if what the discussion should be on this, but vaccinations in general, you know, we have processes and policy. I believe that's what it would be, policy for instance, 7th grade. When you go into 7th grade, you have to have your shots. Well, what does that mean? And there's various shots on there, vaccinations that people have to have. And so with all the discussion about the COVID vaccination and things of that in the Parent Bill of Rights, is that going to get muddy? Or do we need to put that on as a legislative item for clarity purposes? Or are we okay and it's just going to stay like it is? I'm just throwing out questions on that as far as whether they might be legislative items or not. So I'll just stop right there and see what you would like to do as far as what I left on the sheet, what I've deleted off the sheet, and then what you might want us to add to the sheet.
Perhaps Bridget could help us on the two questions on the Parents' Bill of Rights. What happens when you've got two parents who they don't agree on what should happen? And I think the other thing is on the vaccines, because it does say vaccines, and then there was ways that I know parents can opt out, not opt out, they had to have I think a medical exemption, a note from a doctor or a written religious one, but now with the Parents' Bill of Rights, do they even need that, or can they just opt out of regular vaccines? Do you know, Bridget?
So I know, and I've asked also the legislators and DOEs on this. So as it stands right now, so take out previous to Parent Bill of Rights, or PBR as I affectionately call it, we have families that are split or divorced or in the midst of it. Actually, it's a little bit more challenging when they're not officially, formally divorced or split. But as it stands now, and correct me if I'm wrong, that because for domestic circumstances such as that, we always have followed the practice, which is in DOE rule, is that it goes down to the registering parent. Am I correct? Decisions such as that. Now, I'm taking this step by step, so is that correct?
Depends on what district you're in.
Really? So in really? Okay, so then elaborate, because
So in St. John's, the policy was you really don't get involved in that unless there's a court order saying a person should not be allowed, and then you would utilize that court order and make sure the parent understood you're not allowed to. But if you have no court order for that, then any parent that shows up or gives you guidance, you go with that, because we're not getting in the middle of home
domestic. And then so with that, it even goes down to what you just said. And I was going to say that I've seen areas where then sometimes they'll require a parenting plan, and I'm using this for pickup, drop off, all of the records, etc. Because those are all judicial circumstances of which our staff should not be put in that position to make judicial decisions. And I think to your point of maybe that's how that had transpired before. And so, I welcome but as far as the change and whether or not there'll be a legislative tweak to that, I don't know. But to be quite frank, these issues certainly existed pre-COVID. So, and sounds like other districts handle them differently. So our district has always handled it as an aspect of the registering parent. And I wouldn't necessarily say I think that's the perfect way. But what I have been, heard feedback from staff is, I think maybe we can evaluate that as a policy, because I don't think it's by code to be out of compliance or have you. But certainly want to support our staff so that they have some guidance, because if they have questions about it. But is the registering parent the appropriate way to go or not? Does that impose legal exposure, or is there, but I also don't want it to be an impediment, again, to the school sites where they're involved in domestic decisions. And so a lot of those end up being judicial decisions and that is not our bailiwick.
Yeah.
So the short answer is the registering parent. That's the one most districts use. That's the best legal advice, the gold standard. I would say, with respect to what the law is, lawyers will advise, judges will decide. At the end of the day, the legislature writes the law. They have a legislative intent, which you can discern from it. But at the end of the day, it's that third branch, the judicial branch, that ultimately will interpret that law.
Yes, as we are seeing right now.
What about the vaccine part of it? Will they still have to get the medical exemption like what is in there now by a doctor, or can they opt out like what they can for?
None of that language, again, and so none of the language changed. So whatever was there before is there now. It's just housed in one same chapter.
Well, there's that one section that says parents have the right for their health care, and it lists vaccines in there.
That is inclusive. And then in the event there's a dispute, again, that becomes a judicial decision from a family consideration. That's not the district's decision, is my point.
Karen?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to say I wholeheartedly had the fourth bullet and the last one crossed off, so I fully agree with those changes. And I question, there was a point where the Department of Ed and funding had a greater focus on supporting literacy and reading and literacy coaches, which I think have a huge impact. I would look to see if there's any consideration by the superintendent or fellow board members that we emphasize the heart of all learning and literacy and those kinds of people, resources like literacy coaches in here.
Thank you. When you're saying you don't want the last one, I think you said that too. Is that the one where you say they calculate the required local effort?
Well,
on
yeah, I
fixed
thought that
property value?
since it pretty much stayed the same this year, they didn't roll it back or anything. I think that why would we keep it back on, keep it on there if they did what we wanted them to do this year?
All right, so hopefully it'll stay on there. Okay. Was that all for Karen?
That's
right.
all for Mrs. Rose. Thank you.
Bridget?
I guess one of my main always questions is that what do we, if we're going to talk about legislative priorities, what for Sarasota do we want? Like that's the big one that, I mean, I know VPK is, or early education, appropriations, pilot programs. Those are what I'd much rather spend our time on, why we are deploying specific district funds for a lobbyist. Because I know we do have there are associations that do as the, public education K-12 lobbying on that behalf too. And so we can pull from those resources, or you can pull from those resources. But when I think about Sarasota County's legislative priorities, I certainly want to assure that we are digging deep to think about what it is that we would like to see for Sarasota County that could be beneficial. And I mean, I don't know, again, like I said, if there's a specific legislation that impacts lots of other school boards or districts, I'm not opposed to having it on here. I always see this as an opportunity to find something to really champion for Sarasota County. And that is where I'd like to get some thoughts from the superintendent.
Tom?
Yeah, go. Did you want me to answer that, or?
Go ahead if you want to respond.
Okay. Just the ones for right at the moment, the ones that I listed here are important to us, as you said, other districts as well, but they're definitely important to us. And as far as other very specific Sarasota situations like reading coaches, like Ms. Rose said, I agree with that 100%. And I think, when we talk as a cabinet and we talk about our strategic plan, especially now that you all have heard it, I'm sure that there are a couple things on there that we can find that we could place on here that would help.
Or what about the summer learning academies? They gave us funding before, and then we took it back last year saying, oh, there isn't going to be any funding. But, well, guess what? There is funding.
Yeah.
And they have more funding this year.
So we'll talk to the cabinet, and I'll see if I have a few other ones.
And I guess, do you want the summer learning academies, or do you want the pre-K dollars? But pre-K would go across the,
I want all of them.
Pre-K's more federal, really.
Tom?
I agree with the concept of what should be Sarasota specific, and then I point to the second to the bottom bullet, an increase in mental health funding. I don't think it should just say an increase. I think we should add a dollar amount of what we're looking to, and I think we could go to our strategic plan and speak to Ms. Giacalone about what would be helpful as this strategic plan is rolling out. And in addition, I think that there needs to be a better clarification from the state on when vouchers are utilized for whatever the reasons are, where a family at their choice would go to another school, that those schools should be under the same guidelines and have many of the oversights that we have as public schools, so that they're not moving from the fire to the frying pan. We should look at helping the state understand where our families are taking those vouchers and moving them correctly.
Perhaps make sure that all the schools are accredited by some organization.
There you go.
One thing that I was looking at, and then you're next, is I understand that there's a bill to make school board elections partisan again. And, I don't think we need politics to be coming into the school board races. I adamantly oppose partisan elections for school boards, because what happened here a lot, there would be two candidates running and from the same party, and then it shut out. And now it would be closer to 60 or 70% of the population wouldn't get a chance to vote for them. And I think that's what the nonpartisan races was for, was to open it up so everyone could vote for them. Because there's several areas in the county, in the state, where it was one party running for the office, and that was it. But, and where it's not one party, where you would shut everybody else out, I think then it would bring partisanship into races again. And as it is now, I mean, you know, we're being labeled as things, but I just don't think we need to be putting party hats on people. Jane?
Well, that was exactly what I was going to say, was about nonpartisan, and I want to see the school board stay nonpartisan. Janice Mee worked on the school board for a lot of years. You may or may not have heard of her, but she's been dead now for some time. But Janice Mee was a fighter for school boards being nonpartisan, which I think passed in 2000. And I think it's very important to the lifeblood of this school board organization. If we continue to go down the road of really diminishing the importance of school boards, eventually we will not have school boards in the state. We will have a CEO, superintendent in each school district, and we'll have one main school board in Tallahassee. And that is a design as we move toward choice and toward more students and vouchers. But anything that we could do to put something in about vouchers and the accountability issue, since they have none. And I might add, Step Up for Students is having trouble right now processing all of the applicants that they have. And the children that are at most at risk from Step Up are the Gardner and McKay scholarships. So they're going to be looking for additional funding this term for vouchers. They're going to be looking for something that's a continuation. And there's a bill that may be passed. They're getting signatures now to go with a gambling bill and opening that up to someone besides the Indian tribe, so that part of the money that comes in from that could go to public schools. I say, that might sound real good, but maybe that's one of the areas that might go off to voucher land. But I had a presentation on that last week, and it was quite interesting.
Any other comments? Well, I think there was one other thing that I was looking at when we found out over this mask opt-out. I think Dr. Bush was saying, or not Dr. Dan Bush, the chiropractor, was saying that chiropractors can do school physicals and for sports physicals. And I'm like, I didn't realize that they were able to do that. And there is a 1981 law that says, explained it, why chiropractors, I guess they don't write prescriptions or anything, and they're all to do with the spine. So I'm not sure why they are being allowed to do sports physicals, because I think one of the things we have to really be concerned about with sports is if somebody has hypertension or overweight or whatever, but also that myocarditis, the heart problems that is hidden. I mean, I think we want a doctor that understands and listens to the heart, not looks at the alignment of his back when they're doing a school physical for sports.
So the FHSAA allows for chiropractors to do physicals in sports.
So it's through so
in the
maybe we
guidelines.
need to talk well, I guess that would be through the legislation. Where's that guy with that big book? We'll look at that to
In my
see
office.
if it's in law or if it's in the rules from FHSA or whatever.
Yeah.
At the last board meeting, we voted on the agenda for the consortium, and there were some people who didn't have it. I printed them out for us. But the consortium agenda also talks about adequate funding, especially for those districts like we are, the high property districts, student mental health and safety services, which is on our agenda, the accountability and state assessment, which we probably want to go back and look at now that we're hearing they might be changing it, and the other one was kindergarten readiness. Those were the issues that the consortium had, and I will give you a copy of this if you like. Bridget.
So I wanted to, One of the other areas, so I like the idea of maybe whether it be the summer learning academies or literacy coaches and requesting an appropriation, we'd have to be able to substantiate the benefit and illustrate through data that it is a proven benefit. So I'm looking over Chris, but you too. And that would make it pivotal in order for us to get that done, or in hopes to get it. And then the final part was, I really would like to see something. I don't believe it was achieved last year, when the workforce education funding is still on the rolling 3-year average. Is that correct?
Yes, it's still on.
And so I'd like to prioritize that. I just think that's such a huge area. We do it so well. And if they want to do a pilot program to see if they want to fund it, not do the 3-year rolling average, that would be a great Sarasota specific thing, because I think arguably we do it better than anyone else in the state. So I would like to put that as a priority. And if we use fully fund, again, these things need to be backed up by, like, how much would that equate to? What could we have done with that? So the story's there so that it makes it a lot easier for them to champion it for us up there. Oh, and lastly, I just clarify that you had asked a question about adding something on vaccines in here.
Yeah, it was just about, and just to be practical, here's what happens. You know, you're at Laurel Nokomis, and you're the principal, and parents come in and students are going into 7th grade, and there's someone that shows and they don't have their vaccinations, and then we have to tell them, look, we can't really let you be in school until you get those vaccinations. That's been going on forever.
Right.
And so, with the parents' Bill of Rights and with everything going on, I just want to know, I just want to make sure we're all clear, so our principals and everybody at our schools can be clear, because we want to tell the parents the right thing. And right now, we're going to keep telling them everything that we've been telling them.
Which is currently
But if
registering
that seems
parent,
to change,
correct?
we just need to know.
And that's a registering parent as it stands right now. Is that right?
Mm-hmm, that's registering. But I mean, even if it's registering parent, that's not as much the point as, what if I have a parent who says, what do you mean my child can't come into 7th grade without that? And we explain it and show them, they're like, yeah, but according to the Parent Bill of Rights, I don't have to do that. And is that going to happen? And then how do we handle it? And we can handle it, and everything. We just want to make sure we're handling it correctly.
No, I'm glad. I mean, I certainly will share that. I know that Patrick and I already talked about it too. So, and again, I've always pivoted back to the registering parent, and then trying to keep our staff out of judicial decisions, but certainly.
And if nothing changes, great. We just continue on that we've been. I just want to make sure as if there's going to be I don't know.
I didn't know if you were asking to add it.
No, well, I just want to add something on there for clarity. Is there going to be anything to clarify the Parent Bill of Rights on the parent versus parent thing, and then also with vaccinations that we've been doing forever? Is that going to change? And maybe I shouldn't even be asking that question. I don't know. We'll just continue to do everything that we've been doing. I just was wondering if this year, is that going to be something that's going to be talked about or not? Because I know those are questions that come up. So just one other item that I wanted to mention. Chris, Mr. Renoff, can you come up for just a second? Not to put you on the spot, but I am kind of putting you on the spot. That pilot reading program that we have been awarded here in Sarasota, I don't know if you remember that. That was a couple of months ago, and it looks like we are part of that, and we are going to receive around $700,000.
$700,000.
And so we're utilizing that to help us in our reading program. Very excited about that, and I just wanted to just kind of tell you what we're going to do with that money.
So, yes, we've been waiting, and eager. We just last week submitted a grant proposal, so we're waiting to hear back. It was about $700,000. It was initially at $300,000, but the money that we actually were allocated, we were one of, I want to say, 7 or 9 districts in the state of Florida. And so basically, $700,000 is a lot of money, but it goes pretty quickly when you start thinking about training and resources and support for teachers. And so basically it has become an ESE project that we basically are going to focus on our students with disabilities and learning disabilities, and make sure that we are training all of our ESE teachers starting at the elementary, just to kind of build capacity there, so that, again, from a dyslexia lens, just reading deficiency, making sure that our teachers who over time have basically expressed that they really need explicit training in reading are going to get the support that they need. So we're just waiting.
right.
We're just waiting to hear back.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. So you're clear on the legislative platform. I can see that now. And I know you're going to be working with the Superintendent's Association tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. I know Tom is going to be over doing some lessons for FSBA. Which ones are you doing? Well, one of them is labor negotiations. I'm doing that on Friday morning, and then you've got another one you're doing tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Thursday. Member comments. Mr. Edwards.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we get this on an agenda item quickly to match the superintendent's evaluation form to the strategic plan. Now that it's rolled out, I'd like to make sure that we get that done so we don't find ourselves in the situation that we found ourselves in last June. So I don't know how I go about doing that, but I'm just bringing it up that I'd like to see it on an agenda somewhere. I would also like to bring up two things for the board to consider in and around the mask policy. One is I'd like to see the have it be relaxed for outdoors at sporting events and dances and, God forbid, graduation. And also for us to think about a medical opt-out purpose could be if the student is vaccinated. So I just throw those two things out.
I know that Out of Door Academy has a mask policy that sunsets if 70% of their middle or high schools are vaccinated. It's just something that's out there. But I think by the time we pass it, we have to advertise it for 30 days.
If I may, I was just more specifically giving that as a potential for a pediatrician or the doctor to use as a form of medical opt-out.
Oh, I see what you're saying. We can't change the policy to, Dan, I'm talking to you. You might not know. I didn't want to, if we have to change the policy, even if it's the emergency policy, even if we wanted to change the outdoor aspect of it, because basically it's not being followed at games and things like that anyway. Will we have to do the 30-day thing? Because it wouldn't be an emergency to make it easier, or?
You would have to either change the policy through the emergency procedures we utilized last time or the normal administrative policy procedures.
And by the time we change it, we may not be there anymore. Bridget.
That was around the same vein. I had a question for Mr. DeLeo in that same reference, because I know we received a couple emails on it. And so I guess you had just answered that. My question is there any provision under the superintendent's authority in which he could allow at the direct, I mean, as I read that emergency policy, it's the opposite of broad. I mean, it is tight where I would, if I could find a word in there that I could pull and say, hey, we could, but I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to shift to general counsel. Is there anything in that language that we could, that the superintendent under his authorization, he could authorize that outdoors recess? I mean, it's no secret. I want it anyway, but I'm just saying I know the outdoor piece is to me almost dangerous in the aspect it's hot and they're young, and I know we dealt with this before and you handled it wonderfully. So I'm begging us to find a way, because to me it sends a very confusing message, and I do think there's a risk factor of forcing that to be done outside. It's hot, and it just to me is wrong. So
I guess she's asking, can the superintendent issue a procedure or something, or say to ignore something?
So I'm happy to look at that policy and see whether or not I can craft an argument that would allow the superintendent to do that. But I'd have to examine the precise language of the policy.
The other thing would be, I would imagine perhaps somebody could make a motion to, but we don't even have the language to.
It's not that-
But I
Well,
suppose by 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock, we might have some language
But it's it's the advertisement provision of which and that's
to
where,
advertise the change, so it'd still take 30 days.
unless there's guidance through council of which we could do. And I mean, again, I don't like playing with this stuff because I take
I know.
advertising policy very seriously, but I also think it's horrible that children have to wear masks outside. So I
Okay.
implore you to find some way in which that would not be required.
Karen?
Yes, thank you. We have a trend in my perception of throwing around politics a lot on this dais. And I know firsthand, having been in 3 different schools, the best way to stay away from politics is to focus in on instruction and learning and the resources and budget that support that. And to hold ourselves accountable and having that in mind, it's very difficult and very challenging. I don't have an issue with any one board member representing themselves. I do take issue when someone goes out in public and represents me. And so I want to make clarification that when our school board attorney, Mr. DeLeo, went on a local radio show that describes itself as Sarasota politics and represented the board, that I had no awareness, nor did I have input. So that was a little shocking. And in that conversation, referenced Florida officials in a negative manner, and also attached crazy as a descriptor to parents, which is in opposition to everything I believe in and does not represent me. Thank you.
Brennan?
Oh, sorry, I had the same question as Bridget and Tom, actually. Sorry.
I'm sorry, what was that question?
was-
I've forgotten.
There
what
was
it was.
the same question that, it was about if the superintendent can make amendments to the policy and just do that.
I am getting old. My
Yeah.
memory doesn't last so long. Okay, with that, we will adjourn the workshop and prepare for the meeting at 3 o'clock. You should go lightly.